In this video, we're going to talk about guest communications, monitoring, problem solving generally. All volunteers are responsible for monitoring guests and communicating with them. We know that real problems are pretty rare, but they do happen. And we would like all volunteers, both core and nightly, to watch for conflicts, watch for other problems, and try to resolve them. Nightly volunteers should contact a core team member as needed, and core team members should contact the shelter operations manager as needed for any unresolved problems. Some of the potential problems and strategies to deal with them. One is inter-guest conflict. We all know that every once in a while we'll hear voices heating up, and when you hear this, we should intervene quickly. We should talk to the people, try to separate them, talk to both of them separately. You don't want to mediate, but you do want to make sure you're telling your decision as appropriate to both of the parties. Again, ask for help if needed. Less common is guest-volunteer conflict. Again, separate the parties. If you've seen a guest take off on one of the nightly volunteers particularly, separate them. And the problem should be handled by a core volunteer. We do want to make sure we're logging any kind of guest-volunteer conflict. Not surprising, intoxication often comes into play. If someone is confrontational, you should consider calling the crisis intervention team. We'll talk about that later. If a guest is too intoxicated to follow directions, it may be necessary to eject that person. That's per the safe space policy, particularly if there's issues of safety to other persons or to property. You may need to call 911 for law enforcement and/or medical assistance, but the solution may just be to let the person get to sleep. Tactical communication is a technique that's used in a variety of settings. It's taught to police officers, but it's also taught to teachers. It's even taught to officials for high school sports. The goal is to generate voluntary compliance with your requests and your directions. Tactical communication calls on us to respect certain principles. And one is to think about what do people need. We all need to be respected, not disrespected. We like to be asked, not told what to do. We like to be told why we're being asked to do something. We prefer to be given options, certainly not threats. And we like to be given a second chance. The general approach of tactical communication is to act professionally based on your role. It is never personal. Say that again, it is never personal. Remain calm and speak clearly. Listen carefully. Be assertive, not aggressive, and remember that you're not negotiating. You're trying to get them to comply with whatever you need. Speak to others as you would expect to be spoken to. And be careful to match your verbal and nonverbal messages. Think about how you're standing, where your arms are, how close you are to the person. Match your verbal to your nonverbal. Some specific techniques. The first is ask instead of command. Both research and experience have proven that about 96% of all difficult people will comply if they're asked instead of being commanded to do something. People tend to react negatively to being told what to do, but they will often comply if they're asked what to do. Explain why. Set the context for what you're asking. Give the reason for your request. Safety, respect for other guests, respect for the church, whatever the reason is. Someone who's asked to do something and refuses will often comply if you explain why they're being asked to do something. If someone asks why, and they probably won't accept the reason is because I told you so, you're going to have to give a better answer. 3, give the person options. Everyone likes to think that he or she is the one choosing to do something. You're trying to influence the person to do something that you want him or her to do, and having the person believe it was his or her idea in the first place is very effective. Look, you have some options here is a good way to get attention. Present the option that is in the person's best interest. For example, being inside for the night versus having to leave the shelter. The other option that is always available is that if they don't follow the rules, they will be excluded from safe space. And if they know that is the other alternative, then hopefully they will opt for what's better for them, which is to go along with what you want. 4, once the person has selected an option, they've agreed to do what you want, hopefully, confirm that option. If someone won't comply before you take action, confirm for the record, there's nothing we can do if you keep saying this or if you refuse to do this. By way of a confirmation statement, is there anything I can say or do to get you to go along with the program today? I really hope there is a good way to put it. Make sure they know that you are doing everything possible to go along with their better option, and that throwing them out is going to be the last option, but it is always there. Finally, whatever option is chosen, act on that option. This is when you conclude nothing will get the person to follow the rules and they must be excluded per the policy. When you've made the decision, act decisively, act immediately. You want to be able to say to yourself that the person had every opportunity to comply but refused, that you were given no choice to do what you chose to do. There are times when people respond to you with insults or with abuse, and the natural reaction is to respond in time. Don't do it. The person may be expecting this, they may even be hoping for it. Don't do it. Instead, use a professional response. And there's certain techniques that are available to you. One is just let the person vent. They may run out of steam when done. Second, try to block what they're doing. For example, can I ask you not to swear at the church? Third, use verbal deflectors. I know what you're saying, but can we focus on, you may be correct, but what we need to do is, the more personal the insult, the more important it is for you to respond professionally. Pass the problems up the line as needed. Nightly volunteers should be dealing with core volunteers if they're having problems. That's why the core exists. Core volunteers should be talking to the shelter operations manager if they've got problems they can't deal with. The shelter operations manager is on call at all times. There's 4 of us, and one of us is always on call. The person who's on call on any particular night is listed on the daily volunteer roster. That's in the front of the intake and shelter policy binders. That person carries a safe space phone when on duty, and the number is programmed into both the intake center and the shelter phones at position 2. In addition, the personal phone numbers for each of the other managers is programmed in, so if you need a backup, if you can't find the person on call for whatever reason, you can call one of the others. Please call anytime you need help or aren't sure what to do, but always call in certain circumstances. One is, if you have to call 911 for any reason, let the shelter operations manager know. If police respond to the shelter, whether or not you called them. Anytime you're unable to handle a problem with a guest, if there's a physical fight or violence involving guests, anytime a guest is transported for medical care, whether it's by ambulance or by taxi or by whatever other means, call us if you're out of a critical supply, and call us if there's a big problem with a facility, such as a leaking roof or some other major factor. We're here, call us. There may be times when you also might call the crisis intervention team. The CIT is a resource that's available to us, and members of the CIT will respond either to intake or to shelter upon the request of any core team member to manage behavioral crises and to provide expertise to volunteers regarding guests who are in crisis. CIT might be called for situations such as a guest who is emotionally upset, who appears distraught, who's making suicidal threats. The CIT can spend more time with individual guests than team leaders can who have other responsibilities. The on-call CIT member can be reached by calling the number that's programmed into all the Safe Space phones at position 4. Let me just point out, calling the CIT is not appropriate when a guest is suffering a medical emergency, if a suicidal threat has become specific suicidal actions, or if the person is acting violence to others. In those situations, 911 should be called instead. This concludes the core team training program for this year, the various tapes that we put up for you to watch. Again, feel free to come back and watch them again if needed. I think this last one is particularly useful that way to see a few times. We will continue trying to provide training updates. If you have any suggestions on the training, or if you have problems that you think needs to be spread out among the team, please let any member of the shelter operations team know, and we will try to get that around to people. Thanks again. Let's all have a great season.